Free will fights for its place in a universe ruled by cause and effect, and that fight shapes every choice you think you make. In this video, we unpack the big question: does freedom exist if the world is determined? From classical determinism to quantum ideas, from brain science to ethics, we'll cut through the noise, lay out the strongest arguments on both sides, and show what each view would mean for responsibility, law, and everyday life. You'll also see Svobody Voli Determinism explored side by side in English and Russian, so the debate travels across languages and traditions. If you've ever wondered whether your next decision is truly yours or just a link in a causal chain, this video gives you a clear way to think about it and decide what you believe. Stick around for a practical framework you can apply to your own choices. Let's dive in. Defining free will and determinism. Free will is commonly defined as the capacity to choose among alternatives in a given moment. Determinism is the view that every event, including mental events, is causally determined by prior states and natural laws. In compatibilist accounts, freedom remains possible even if determinism is true. They redefine freedom as the ability to act according to one's own motivations without external constraint. In incompatibilist accounts, freedom and determinism cannot both be true. They insist that if every action has a prior cause, genuine freedom collapses. A simple illustration helps. In a coffee shop, you order a latte because your taste, mood, and habit push you toward that choice, not because you were unconstrained by anything external. Still, many people feel a sense of freedom in that moment, a feeling that they could have chosen otherwise if they wished to do so. The core questions split cause from control. Libertarian free will argues that some actions originate in the agent and are not predetermined by past events. This view often appeals to a sense of authentic authorship and moral responsibility. Hard determinism denies that authenticity exists, claiming every decision is the inevitable outcome of prior causes. Compatibilists, sometimes labeled soft determinists, insist that freedom can be about acting without coercion and in line with one's own reasons, even if those reasons themselves have causal history. A practical example is resisting an unwanted urge. A person may feel free to pass on a harmful impulse if they act in accordance with personal values, even though the impulse had a brain-based cause. Neuroscience adds an empirical layer to the debate. Experiments indicate that brain signals can precede conscious intention, which some interpret as undermining the notion of conscious origin of action. Others argue that those signals simply reflect preliminary processing, while a person still exercises a veto or a rational endorsement before acting. Freedom, in this sense, is about reflective capacity. In this view, free will is not uncaused origin, but the ability to reflect, decide, and revise internal plans. Responsibility can persist under determinism if the emphasis rests on intentional alignment with reasons and on the capacity to modify behavior through reasoning. In everyday life, definitions shape how people think about praise and blame. Legal systems rely on a working notion of agency that allows for punishment and reward, even when choices are influenced by genetics, upbringing, or circumstances. The question of whether free will exists in a determined universe does not yield a single yes or no answer. It yields a spectrum of positions that emphasize different aspects of freedom. Practically, many people experience meaningful agency in daily decisions, and that sense of agency can coexist with an underlying causal order in a way that motivates personal growth and social functioning. Historical debates and key positions. The debate has traced the fate of free will through competing understandings of causation and agency. Incompatibilists argue that if every event is caused by prior states and laws, genuine freedom is unavailable. Compatibilists contend that freedom can exist in a determined system when actions align with one's desires and are not coerced. The central questions ask what counts as freedom, how moral responsibility is possible, and how control is defined in everyday choices as well as in law and ethics. Historical discussion often centers on whether acting for reasons is enough to count as freedom, or whether the mere absence of coercion is sufficient. Ancient and early modern thinkers framed the problem around voluntary action and rational order. Aristotle highlighted voluntary actions as those performed with knowledge and in accordance with deliberation, distinguishing them from acts driven by ignorance or compulsion. The Stoics emphasized inner autonomy and the discipline to live in accord with rational nature, even under external constraint. Descartes argued for a mind capable of willing and choosing independently of mechanical forces, while Spinoza presented a vision of a strictly determined universe in which freedom is reinterpreted as understanding necessity. In the modern era, David Hume pushed toward a form of compatibilism by arguing that freedom can involve deliberation and responsiveness to internal motives within a causal chain. Kant placed freedom at the heart of morality, insisting that practical reason presupposes a form of autonomy even if empirical events follow causal laws. From the mid or later modern period onward, the landscape broadened with new arguments about moral responsibility. William James defended a more probabilistic and indeterministic strand, suggesting that human agency can be robust even in a world with contingent events. The late 20th century brought sharp arguments by proponents of libertarian free will, who insist that genuine alternatives exist and are not determined by prior states. Peter van Inwagen developed clear incompatibilist reasoning around the consequences of determinism for responsibility, while Daniel Dennett popularized a sophisticated compatibilist reading that frames freedom as the capacity to act for reasons in a social world. Frankfurt offered a nuanced challenge to the idea that freedom requires the ability to do otherwise by introducing scenarios where second-order desires and volitional control determine action regardless of alternate possibilities. Galen Strawson questioned whether ordinary moral responsibility is sustainable under any deterministic account, prompting further refinement of what responsibility should mean in practice. Modern discussions also engaged scientific findings with caution. Experiments on neural readiness and intention in decision-making added a new layer to the historical debate by showing brain activity preceding conscious choice in certain tasks. Critics warn that these results do not automatically negate freedom, since conscious endorsement, reflection, and the ability to revise plans still play meaningful roles. The dialogue between philosophy and neuroscience has pushed scholars to clarify what counts as agency, whether control must be absolute, and how social practices like punishment and praise should adapt if our concept of freedom shifts. Across centuries, the core tension remains: how to reconcile a coherent account of responsibility with a universe governed by causal laws, and how to preserve meaningful human autonomy in the face of that tension. Scientific perspectives on determinism and choice. In scientific terms, determinism is the view that natural events unfold according to laws and prior states, making future states, in principle, knowable from present conditions. Classical physics often supports this view. Yet the picture shifts when quantum phenomena are considered, since individual events can appear inherently probabilistic rather than strictly determined. At the human scale, complexity matters. Chaotic dynamics in weather, biology, and neural networks mean that even a deterministic underpinning can yield outcomes that are effectively unpredictable because we cannot measure or model every variable with perfect precision. That matters for how we think about choice. Neuroscience adds a practical layer by asking when a decision becomes accessible to conscious experience and voluntary action. Readiness potentials in brain activity have been reported as preceding the moment of reported intention. Experiments show that some neural signals can forecast choices before a person reports deciding, but the accuracy is imperfect and can depend on how the task is framed. Critics raise timing and interpretation concerns. Crucially, later work suggests conscious veto, sometimes called a free won't, can shape outcomes by suppressing a prepotent impulse even after unconscious brain activity has started. The take-home is cautious about what is claimed. From a theoretical standpoint, several models try to reconcile everyday experience of choice with a scientific account of determinants. Compatibilism argues that freedom can be meaningful if actions align with one's motives and values. Libertarian positions push for genuine agency beyond deterministic processes, while many researchers view decision-making as probabilistic inference under uncertainty, with random fluctuations providing room for novelty. Noise in neural systems is a fact of biology. In cognitive science and artificial intelligence, the brain is often framed as a Bayesian engine that updates beliefs and selects actions to maximize expected outcomes, drawing on prior knowledge, sensory data, and learned policies. That framing highlights process over providence. In daily life and in public policy, the determinism debate translates into how we assign responsibility and design institutions. If brain activity constrains choice, accountability still applies to how people respond to information and norms. Practical implications appear in medicine, law, and education, where clear explanations of decisions improve insight while avoiding the impression that responsibility dissolves into randomness. Technology that models prediction must respect autonomy and resist fatalism. The science points to a nuanced picture in which deterministic processes interact with contingent outcomes, allowing meaningful notions of will to operate within limits. The conversation crosses borders and languages, including discussions like a swobodi voli determinisme, as diverse perspectives test the boundaries of what we call choice. Theoretical frameworks: compatibilism, incompatibilism, libertarianism. Compatibilists argue that free will can exist within a determined universe by reframing freedom as acting in accordance with one's desires and rational deliberation without external coercion. Incompatibilists insist that true freedom requires the ability to have acted otherwise. Libertarianism, a branch of incompatibilism, adds that some choices are not causally determined and that agents possess genuine agency to initiate actions. This trio frames the ongoing question of moral responsibility. A classic compatibilist move is to distinguish between coercion-free freedom and randomness, noting that coercive threats or addictions block freedom no matter what determinism says, while deliberating agents can still be responsible. For example, a driver follows traffic rules because they value safety. Even if their choice arises from neural processes shaped by past experiences, the absence of external compulsion and the presence of reasons-guided action counts as freedom in this view. Critics push back by asking whether determinism makes could have done otherwise meaningfully false. Incompatibilists deny that determinism and genuine freedom can coexist, leading to two main routes: hard determinism, which accepts no free will, and libertarianism, which preserves freedom by positing non-determined agency. Hard determinists point to the coercive forces of causality as reasons to rethink responsibility. Libertarians insist that agents exert causal power over their actions through agent causation or indeterministic action initiation, allowing people to be morally responsible in ways determinism would undermine. A concrete example is a moral decision to end a harmful habit, which libertarians say involves a genuine choice not fixed by prior states. Opponents argue that true indeterminism could undermine rational deliberation and predictability, making it hard to justify consistent praise or blame. The debate remains lively in philosophy and cognitive science. In legal and ethical contexts, compatibilist accounts often provide a workable framework for praise, blame, rehabilitation, and consistent policy without denying science. Neuroscience adds nuance by showing mental preparation can precede conscious intention. Thus, many thinkers advocate soft determinism or compatibilist realism, which accepts deterministic causation while preserving conditions under which agents can be held responsible for reasons they endorse. Libertarianism, when applied to policy, faces the challenge of identifying non-deterministic mechanisms that can be empirically supported. Ultimately, the frameworks guide how we talk about choice in daily life, from personal decisions to judicial standards, even if science continues refining its portrait of the mind. The question of freedom in a determined universe remains a productive terrain for both philosophy and practical living. Implications for ethics, law, and meaning. Determinism presents the idea that every event, including human choices, follows from prior states of the world and the laws governing them. In daily life, people still experience themselves as making choices, and social norms assume a degree of agency. Neuroscience suggests that neural processes can start before conscious intention, yet the facts people care about are the visible outcomes of actions and the reasons presented for them. This means the moral conversation continues to hinge on reasons, forethought, and the consequences of behavior, not on metaphysical guarantees of freedom. The topic embraces a swobodi voli determinisme, reflecting a cross-cultural interest in how responsibility adapts when freedom is understood through cause and effect rather than mythic absolutes. Ethics adapts by reframing what we honor or critique. If actions are determined, moral evaluation often shifts toward what helps communities flourish and reduces harm, rather than toward a simple verdict of deserved praise or punishment. People still value honesty, courage, and cooperation, and society tends to reward alignment with shared goals even if that alignment emerges from deep causal forces. Compatibilist views propose that freedom can mean the ability to act according to one's own reasons and deliberations, even when those reasons themselves arise from prior causes. In practice, this supports praising someone for choosing to help a neighbor and blaming someone for knowingly causing harm, because the distinction rests on intentional alignment with valued norms. Deterrence, rehabilitation, and proportional responses to harm remain central, while the logic of desert becomes more nuanced and focused on preventing future harm and supporting well-being. Law translates these ideas into standards of liability and accountability. Culpability often rests on the mental state at the time of action, the foreseeability of outcomes, and the ability to understand right from wrong. Insanity defenses, diminished capacity claims, and considerations of addiction or coercion are ways that legal systems acknowledge limits on control without abandoning accountability. If neural and cognitive processes shape choices in predictable ways, courts may emphasize capacity and reform over retribution in many cases. That does not erase responsibility, but it reshapes sentencing towards safety, rehabilitation, and fairness. Real-world practices show a preference for transparent decision-making, evidence-based risk assessment, and proportional penalties designed to deter harm while offering pathways to redemption and reintegration. Meaning emerges as a core human concern even when freedom is not absolute. People construct identities through long-term commitments, practices, and shared projects, and these narratives provide motivation, social trust, and resilience. The sense of agency can persist in a determinist framework if individuals are seen as active authors of their character, capable of choosing commitments, learning from mistakes, and repairing damages done to others. Communities reinforce meaning by supporting personal growth, offering opportunities, and encouraging responsibility for consequences. When institutions treat people with dignity and focus on constructive outcomes, the sense that life has purpose and direction endures, even amid an understanding that causes shape choices. From a practical standpoint, policy design can balance insight into causal influences with respect for agency. Restorative justice, which centers on repairing harm and involving affected parties, often aligns with determinist realism by prioritizing outcomes over mere punishment. Rehabilitation-focused approaches and proportional penalties support public safety while recognizing the complexity of causes behind behavior. Ensuring due process, minimizing stigma, and guarding against overreach and predictive assessments are essential to maintain trust. In everyday terms, the implication for ethics, law, and meaning is not a surrender to fatalism but a recalibration. We strive for a society where accountability, care, and purpose coexist, and where our institutions respond to how decisions unfold in a causally structured world without losing the human elements that make those decisions meaningful. To sum up, determinism may place every event in an unbroken chain, yet many philosophers defend a usable sense of freedom by defining it as acting on our own reasons without external coercion. Compatibilists say you can be free in a determined universe. Hard determinists deny genuine freedom. Libertarians insist some choices are uncaused. The practical takeaway is that responsibility, deliberation, and meaning can persist even if the future is constrained. Your choices still reflect who you are and what you value, and that matters in how we live and relate to others. If this sparked something, first I'd love to hear where you stand in the comments. Compatibilism, hard determinism, or libertarian free will? If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Next up, we'll take a closer look at Libet-style experiments and cultural ideas of autonomy, plus a conversation with a philosopher about whether freedom is a useful idea in a deterministic world. We'll also peek ahead to how AI and ethics are shaping our sense of agency. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.